Abdullah.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the 2009 Global Philanthropy Forum, one of the most energizing events of the year. My name is Howard Buffett, and for as long as I can remember, philanthropy has held a place in both my mind and my heart. It is my honor to introduce to you Jane Wales, who co-founded the Global Philanthropy Forum 8 years ago, and who has built it into the learning community that I think we are all proud to call our own. Jane?
Thank you, Howard, and welcome to the Global Philanthropy Forum. Somehow this room looks even bigger from up here. It's an extraordinary time to be meeting in Washington. And here we are in what is considered to be a center of power, a center of policy, right now perhaps a center of great promise. But it is also a center of tremendous poverty in our own country. So it is an extraordinary moment for those of us who are so committed to the goals of the Global Philanthropy Forum, to the goals of each of you individually, to be in this town at this time. As I was arriving yesterday, and as I thought of all of you arriving yesterday from your respective homes around the country and around the world, I couldn't help but wonder what it felt like when President Obama arrived off the campaign trail and took a look at the inbox that was awaiting him. And you were worried about what your BlackBerry looked like when you landed. I mean, there he was faced with a global financial crisis, with these synchronized national recessions happening one after the next or simultaneously. He was faced with poverty, including new poverty, both at home and abroad, and we don't know where that will go, how long that will go. He was faced with uneven access to affordable health care, to quality education for all, faced with the climate crisis, faced with the need for post-conflict reconciliation and reconstruction abroad, and faced with the possibility of state failure in regions, some of the regions that are the most troubled and most heavily armed, with including nuclear weapons. So addressing these and other challenges as president, he, like any other world leader, is going to need to be able to tap the sources, all sources of social innovation, be they from the public, the private, the non-governmental, or the philanthropic sector. And that's why we're all here today. Now, I want you to know these wonderful screens. I'm not using a teleprompter, but it's so cool that there is one there. Well, I am looking at you through stripes of red, blue, and pink, and you look just gorgeous. But let me just note that as he thinks about reaching out to others, and who are the partners on whom he will be able to rely as he tries to unleash innovation, not only in our country, but throughout the world. And they're in this room. First, foundations led by living beneficiaries have matched the scale and the scope and the impact of longer-lived foundations. All of you, many of you, are shaped by your private sector experience. You're engaged, you're strategic, you're very willing to tackle exceedingly large problems and treat them as systemic problems in need of a system-wide response. Secondly, and of course, like private foundations, you're all about results. Second, this president and other leaders will be able to turn to nonprofit organizations, the organizations that people in this room support. And these have always been the source of steady innovation throughout our history. And of course, they're undergoing a generational shift right now. As baby boomers retire, new leaders emerge, many of these new leaders bringing with them a whole new set of skills, a whole new approach, and the same old commitment to community that their predecessors had. And third, leaders and employers and employees of private sector corporations and social enterprises are perpetually seeking ways to leverage markets, to use the private sector in order to achieve their social objectives. So what we're seeing is that while the economy may be contracting, the social sector continues to be expanding as each actor from each sector decides to take on a very large role. And so this new government that is strapped for resources, faced with really awesome responsibilities, will find that it has got many, many partners to whom to reach out, with whom to work, with whom to partner, and from whom to find really great ideas. But just as with any other partnership, I would argue, and I want to posit to you, it's terribly important to understand what each partner brings to the table. And in many respects, what the philanthropic sector's greatest asset is its independence. And I'm not speaking just about independence from governments. I'm also speaking about independence from the sort of snap judgments of electoral politics, the snap judgments of the markets, that sort of, the tyranny of quarterly reports, a world that is really dominated by 24-hour news cycles, driven by 24-hour news cycles, that makes it terribly hard to take risks. So preserving that independence is enormously important because it preserves the capacity to take risks. It preserves the capacity to make long-term investments in the public interest. And everyone in this room is committed to that. So as you meet one another over the next 3 days, I think let me just say, that those of you who are new to the Global Philanthropy Forum, you will not feel new for very long. I suspect, in fact, it's already over. You're feeling new. This is an enormously welcoming learning community of donors. We're all in the same spot. We're all facing shrinking resources. We're all realizing even more that we need one another, to leverage one another, to learn from one another, and that we can work across sectors to get the job done. This is a community of people who feel compelled to get things done, and will. Now, what you're going to find is something that I found most extraordinary about the Global Philanthropy Forum, and that is that we find that throughout the year, this is just a punctuation point, our annual conference in the midst of a year, but throughout the year, over 83% of Global Philanthropy Forum members say that they rely on one another as they develop their strategies for giving or their strategies for social investing. And for those of you who are new, I hope that when you leave in 3 days, that you've got a whole new group of friends and colleagues on whom to rely in that way, so that you will be perpetually gaining from their knowledge, their experiences, their opportunities, their mistakes, and that you will be willing to share yours in a similar fashion, because they're going to rely on you. So please, I hope you didn't come here just to learn. I hope you came here to teach, because that's what's most needed. Now, I really have a very special role to play right now, and that is the opportunity to introduce to you an extraordinary leader, and that is Her Majesty Queen Rania Al Abdullah of Jordan. You know that she was born in Kuwait, that she was educated at the American University in Cairo, that she started out her career in the private sector, both in banking and in the IT sector, and that despite, or maybe even because of her own professional success, she remained very deeply committed to ensuring that those people who did not have the same opportunity to realize their dreams would gain that opportunity to do so. She now speaks to us all when she calls upon those in the rich world to live up to their promise to the poor world to meet the Millennium Development Goals. She argues that these are promises that must be kept. So let me just use her words. She argues that much like half a book, half a boat, half a brain, half a promise will never finish what is started, will never float, and will never reflect our true potential. Please join me in welcoming Queen Rania.
It's great to be celebrating Earth Day with so many inspiring leaders, so many ambassadors of hope and goodwill in places around the globe. Thank you, Jane, for inviting me. I've really wanted to come for some time now. I'm told this gathering has sometimes been called the Conference on Borderless Giving. But in crucial ways, you're also transcending borders within societies, transforming notions of who can lead and how we can drive social change. As Jane, our host, has said so eloquently, you have the agility to invent and find new ways not just to meet short-term needs, but to plant the seeds of long-term solutions. So it's really a pleasure for me to be here, and a privilege as well. Now, I gather from my friend Bill Gates that at conferences like these, if you really want to get the audience buzzing, you have to bring a jar. But don't worry, I'm not about to unleash a swarm of hungry mosquitoes on you. I bought a jar of Jordanian apple jam. And you may wonder why. Well, it has to do with one of the fundamental questions I know we all care deeply about. And that is, how do we know when philanthropy is making a positive difference? I'm here to tell you that part of the answer is Jordanian apple jam. But I'll come back to that later. Because jam may be sweet, but the times we face today are anything but. The current global economic crisis is wreaking havoc on development. Oxfam estimates that 100 million more people may be pushed into poverty by the end of this year. That's the equivalent of 16 Jordans or 160 Washington, D.C.s. Worse still, the ones who are suffering most are women and children and the poorest of the poor. And the history of past recessions shows us that the losses poor people endure are not only in jobs and income levels, but in health and education as well, which is doubly cruel. Because when families have to pull their children out of school just to put a crust of bread on the table, it means those children's futures will be crippled long after the recession has passed. So the need for global philanthropy is more urgent than ever before. Yet, as you know very well, and better than anyone else, the crisis has hit you hard as well. American foundations lost nearly $150 billion in assets last year alone. That's almost as much as you have given away over the past 4 years. Donors are having to make tough choices in the face of overwhelming need, to prioritize where philanthropic dollars will go among equally worthy causes, and sometimes being forced to say no, even when there's no one else who can help. But I think this conference itself is a powerful antidote to tough times. As the saying goes, when the sky is darkest, that's when we see the stars. All of you here, through your commitment and your compassion, are extending lifelines of hope on issues from refugees to rural development, microfinance to malaria prevention. And more than that, you're tilling the soil from which social renewal can bloom. Over the next 3 days, you'll share insights and ideas on a series of difficult challenges that will touch the lives of all our peoples, and no government can solve on its own. I want to focus on one of those challenges, education for a globalized world. And I start from the premise that education is not only a problem, but also a solution. Because when we look at the obstacles we face, education can help us overcome them all. When you educate a child, you give her the tools to lift herself out of poverty. When you educate a mother, you give her the knowledge to protect her health and raise a strong, healthy family. When you educate a community, you cultivate a shared appreciation for sustainable development. And when you educate a country, you encourage greater tolerance, open-mindedness, and peace. For all these reasons, in my part of the world, education is becoming a top priority. Across the Arab states, almost 58 million adults are illiterate. 2/3 of them are women. Almost 6 million children are not enrolled in primary school. The majority of them are girls. We know too many of our school systems are based on rote learning instead of creative inquiry. Too many of our children are being told what to know instead of being taught how to think. Worse yet, we're allowing our demographic advantage to pass us by. More than half our region's population is under 25. Yet we failed to build strong bridges between our schools and the private sector, so that youth unemployment is in double digits and many of our brightest students move abroad. Of course, we realize there's no quick fix for these varied dilemmas, but we also know we have to begin with educational innovation, revamping our curricula, revitalizing lessons with technology, and reinforcing the link between our classrooms of today and the workplaces of tomorrow. In Jordan, we've taken that task to heart, beginning with our national budget. We've increased enrollment, and I'm proud to say we have as many girls in our classrooms as boys. We've launched new initiatives with the private sector to modernize teaching methods and technology. We've established awards to recognize teachers who set high standards of excellence. We're focusing resources on every level, from pre-primary to university. But the fact is, Jordan is a developing country, and many of our schools are old and tired. It's hard to prioritize getting computers into schools where the walls are cracked, the windows broken, and the children must wear coats and hats indoors all winter just to try to keep warm. It's hard to encourage independent thinking in overcrowded classrooms with schools so full they must run 2 shifts when there's barely enough teachers for one. It's hard to inspire young people to believe in their promise and their potential when their facilities are literally falling apart, crumbling, dirty, and dangerous. It's hard. We know what needs to be done, but governments can't do it alone. We need the help of every sector across Jordanian society. And that's the spirit behind the Majesty program we launched last year. The idea that quality education is everyone's responsibility. In Arabic, Majesty means my school. Its aim is very simple: bringing people together from government to business, community leaders, teachers, students, and parents to renovate and revitalize 500 of Jordan's neediest schools. Last summer, we started with the first 100 schools in Amman and Zarqa. 4 government departments, 4 dozen private sector companies, and more than 15 NGO partners have joined in. The Children's Museum gives students free access and curriculum development support for their teachers. One NGO in Jazz is teaching young people the skills to compete in the global economy, everything from economics to entrepreneurship to ethics. Another works with the Royal Health Awareness Society to run school workshops on nutrition and self-care. Private sector volunteers are tutoring, mentoring, and coaching. And for every school, we form a committee including parents and neighborhood leaders to ensure the work reflects the priorities of local communities themselves. Best of all, it's working. Which brings me back to where I started. What's the evidence? How do we know? At the micro level, the answer lies in a jar of apple jam. Let me tell you a story. There's a 9-year-old girl named Layla. She comes from a very disadvantaged neighborhood outside Amman. Layla is part of the student Majesty committee in her school. I mentioned earlier that Majesty partners run a program we call Healthy Schools. Well, through this program, Layla learned that apples were highly nutritious, packed with vitamins and good for your health too. But she also noticed that older students were buying and eating chips and chocolate and throwing away the apples they received in their free school lunches. And some of the younger students were tossing their apples away because, especially the ones who didn't have front teeth and couldn't figure out how to eat them. At about the same time, the Majesty committee challenged members to come up with an idea for a nutritional breakfast. Layla knew her fellow students had a sweet tooth, but she also knew apples were good for them. And that's how the jam idea came about. She and a friend decided to collect uneaten apples from their classmates. The first time they did, they gathered almost 2 kilos from tabletops and windowsills. Then together with her mother, she made the apples into an enormous jar of jam, keeping the sugar to a minimum, something else she learned from the Healthy Schools program. When she brought it into school for breakfast, the students raved about it, coming back for seconds, thirds, and fourths. With Majesty's help, Layla is in the process of getting her jam-making social enterprise approved by the Ministry of Health, no less, because this little girl is dreaming big. Her goal is to make enough jam to feed the children breakfast every morning and have enough left over to sell in the local market. But she's not stopping there. According to her neatly typed up 2-year business plan, she intends to reinvest her profits back into school and, more specifically, revamp the cafeteria and upgrade the computer lab. In her words, "My dream is to make my school better and safer before I leave it for the other children who will follow me." Layla says that before Majesty, she always saw things that needed to be done, but she had no avenue to take action. Being on the committee has given her a place to share her ideas and to make things happen. And Layla's lesson is that philanthropy means so much more than just giving money. Philanthropy means giving bold thinkers like her the chance to lift their communities and to realize the power within themselves to change things for the better. And when it comes to education, the power of philanthropy can be even bigger, not just within communities and countries, but among them, stitching together humanity's frayed seams, especially at a time of global turmoil. You know, the best ambassadors for the United States in the Arab world are men and women who have studied in America. But for those who won't ever be able to study in this country, you can help build friendships and understanding by investing in education abroad. And I know that educational reform is a domestic challenge too. I know that fixing America's schools is a priority for your new president and the public, and that many of you right here in this room are standing on the front lines, teaching for America, building brighter choices, changing the odds for kids in Harlem and DC, and proving that knowledge is power. But especially in these tough economic times, we cannot afford to be protectionist, not in our trade, not in our investment, and not in our philanthropy. Because after all, education is one of the very best investments we can make. It's the chance not just to lift individual lives, but to raise whole generations. A chance not just to brighten futures at home, but to bridge the gaps that divide us around the world. We can do it. We can teach our children well if we only work together. And one day, a little girl like Layla will grow up to be a person just like you, giving back to a global community that's so fit to give something to her. Thank you all very much.
And now for the somewhat more mundane. Let me just share with you a couple of thoughts that a couple of sort of announcements that will help you make the most of the Global Philanthropy Forum this time. We have instituted GPF Connect, which is an online platform, a way for you to connect with one another. You should have been given a login ID with your conference registration, a cool Google map that'll help you find one another. And this is a way for you to not only to connect with one another throughout the conference, because I can see this is rather a jammed hall, so to find one another, but it's also a way to do it throughout the year. So I hope you will take advantage of that. Second, as you know, we have our own sort of participant-led breakout sessions during the mornings, each morning. It's a kind of make-your-own panel opportunity. And what we do is we just take our tables at breakfast time and set up and lead a discussion. And you will find on GPF Connect those discussions that have already been established for you to participate in. Third, I ran into a problem. There are more good ideas than there are panelists. And so what we've done is instituted something else. And this is a GPF moment, really a moment, in which the speaker will get up and in 3 minutes just throw an idea out to the audience. And if you want to follow up, you know how to find that speaker through your GPF Connect. And then finally, I just wanted to say a word about partnerships. As you know, we encourage partnerships among you. But I should say that GPF, the Global Philanthropy Forum, is itself a partnership. And I just wanted to acknowledge our strategic partners and as a group acknowledge our members. The Aspen Institute is a strategic partner. I think I can see through the stripes, Walter Isaacson. Walter, why don't you give a stand? Walter. Walter is the only strategic partner that figured out how to get me to go work for him at the same time. He's really clever, but he's an extraordinary leader of the Aspen Institute, and it is a joy to work with him. Second is, of course, Fondazione Avina, and Brizio Biandimora is here. So give a wave, Brizio. And one of the many things that Brizio and his colleague Emily Fintel bring to the Global Philanthropy Forum is that they help identify social entrepreneurs from throughout Latin America who bring the most extraordinary ideas to us and terrific business plans, who are really making a huge difference. And so we're very, very grateful to them for that. The Skoll Foundation is a deep partner, and I'm sorry to say that Sally Osberg suffered a friend of hers, a family member of hers, recently died. And so Sandy Hertz is here representing the Skoll Foundation. So Sandy, wherever you are, good. You're no longer stuck in Richmond. Last I had was an email last night. She was stuck in Richmond. I told her to drop Robert E. Lee's name as often as possible. But she said she had her own cousins there just in case. None of them was named Lee. She was apparently not going to resort to that. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is a strategic partner. Is that Mike Madnick there? Mike is here, as well as several others. So please form your own partnerships now. We're sure enjoying it. And enjoy your lunch.